and you have it out.
Yeah. I'm good.
Alright, everyone ready? Everyone good?
Yeah.
Versus comparative world 1, evaluate the hypothetical consequence of the punishment versus consequences of words both sides to win offensive reasons for their advocacy. A. Truth testing holds the absolute rigor of truth, whereas the negative and skeptical arguments that are held to a lower standard of truth, making it harder to affirm. B. It gives the negative unlimited number of ways to express the truth, whereas the app can only prove it's true in one way. This makes it hard to. This makes it structurally hard for the app to answer negative positions since they have unlimited flexibility, exacerbating the 7-6, 6-4 times Q that makes it harder to affirm. C. The negative and defense to win the round, they never have to win. These do defense and offensive claims, which are harder defense, they require proof, whereas defense does require proactive proof only. Response to their offense, even if winning defense isn't necessarily easier than winning offense, there's still a chance it is forcing both sides to win offense is more likely to be fair since it's a reciprocal framework. First, the essentials between cannot get action assumes we try to be normatively our language difference doesn't be valuable to believe not correlates to some essentials nature truth only practices and escapes as wordy and 80. Truth is not the sort of thing which has necessary against exercise online as well. Why choose to believe there's vocabulary back about compilation states and useful about truth when we turn from individual sentences to vocabulary terminology sense time utility. The natural process sentences is not to get it right, but what would it be like to believe that? Second, simple presumptions the pleasure continues back to deny value such judgments out of my space for any system about the reasoning Nagel. Almost everyone takes one something as a subjective reason for action pleasure being active value as fast as possible cannot from objective standpoint revolt notion but to objective value judgment no objective view can possibly overrule subjective authority in such cases impacts A. Absolute truth is unnecessary starting to reach their high enough to disprove foundational theories that contradict those situations since the chance that at least one premise in that theory is flawed is higher than the chance that your most fundamental beliefs are incorrect. B. Other ethical theories are tautological because as a consequence there's no way to there to create a rule where an immoral action is taken versus a moral one. Third, government action laws will never lead to rights of citizens they benefit from harm is the only justifiable way to resolve these conflicts by making the maximum possible number of people since anything else but unequally prioritizes one group over another. Several impacts. A. Scientists and theories are used to states and will inevitably violate some constraint. B. Institutional niceness on consequences more fees prevent any action versus worse than not being able to use util. Fourth, people psychologically prefer util governments are obligated to use a genome at all name. The studies provide strong evidence by some people just yet to about the behaviors outcomes, see people see decisions in a different light, people see it as a approach to allow decisions outcome to determine the decision's quality impacts. A. This interesting area has procedural is counterintuitive hard to calculate since most people already believe in it. B. Friends economy makes sense util best to choose the interest of people even if people say they prefer something else util or choose the aim they touch with their decision. C. Governments are not functional opposite util since citizens fully support a government that serves their interest prerequisites to the status key any other obligation. Fifth, policy also requires standard policies on principles and isolation educational activity should foster and inform citizenry. Harwood and 5. Education should refer for life education and development critical thinking and active deliberation because they're thinking are all important in life. Students discuss policy. Students see themselves as participants in the traits of engaged citizens and follow the policies of society. Significant effect teaching about this requires a powerful conceptual analysis of concrete engagement in cases. The point of education is to teach students to think because conscious thinking are the hallmarks of state of weird reward looking aside and will possibly receive it is important to develop a sense of engagement in social policy. 6. No activation distinction for states and circles approval actions still entail moral responsibilities not seen of renewal. Unlike individuals, governments always face choice between regulating third parties governments in the business of creating prohibitions when it authorized private action is not repeating active distinction between authorized and unauthorized action becomes obscure when the government formally forbids private action but does not fully discourage it. 7. If there's even a certain which draws prioritize survival of the human race to ensure future value. Bostrom. Moral to suggest self next option might be confused if we are uncertain this great value serving our ability to recognize value to the future accordingly ensure that the future dimensions the best way to increase future value. Must manage minimizing existential risk. Advantage 1 is protest. The root cause of protest in Hong Kong is economic conditions, 11 which we call protest. Working 14. What is being overlooked to the rest of Hong Kong? Hong Kong has seen economic conditions of which the premise of honest cost of living is often matched by wage growth who might be impacted most students who have very little disposable income when you get an underlying cause of Hong Kong central like an inability to earn a living wage. Hong Kong is more likely to escape within the indicator, and low wages mean another way to protest in Hong Kong is inevitable. That challenges the legitimacy of forces to response across stability. Worker 14. Demonstrators have serious implications for political stability. The Communist Party, the evasion of forces have been set by the president are prepared to go on another. They want the president to continue. They do not want to. Compromising double line the young Hong Kongers have worked the jobs process, this generation is now thinking about negative. They crack down their reputation will be damaged if they negotiate. They present invisible positiveness. Could reoccur periodically to keep it growing while paralyzing government invasion. We have to use force. This way, mutate to a large challenge to the Communist Party. And CCP class multiple will use the worst for 10 and 12. Destabilizing the fact that reform major railroad relations anticipated stability, financial rest, and stability China system to prevent the North Koreans from becoming desperate. China continues to export basic launch China's been a facilitator of talks for and like touches not only South Korea relying on China's interests, but also as a partner China's purchase prevented a violent attack conflict should the Chinese government under its ability system may be faced with a serious nuclear conflict between North and South Korea. The time which continues to be an issue of critical honesty and international within Taiwan would take advantage of the CCP distraction to take most of the rest of South allies could be pulled into conflict with Japan integrating economically into Chinese trade. Should the CCP undergo instability, it could cause significant conflict over territories between Japan and its allies. Japanese economy destabilization to draw on international parties and economically assist China's messaging. Destabilization could not scroll through the speech down before I read it. Destabilization could lead the Indian military panic reform could cause massive immigrant flows to China, and India have a regional example of destabilization due to immigrant flows. Indian economy is reliant on China as a trading partner, and that translates to the state must maintain rifles to ensure that domestics are one subject to the will of another. We've seen in 9. A united lawgiving room. A united line will require the state to maintain material preconditions and generate systems vital to initially the economy. The state must sustain its basic principles of organization through time, even as some members die. People fail to share a will through private independence and our poverty, the poor are completely subject to the choice of those in more fortunate circumstances. This has two effects. A, government stability is a precondition for rights claims, and any action which responsibility makes rights claims impossible. Means-based standards make the abstract assumption of government stability, but the collapse takes off the assumption turning the NCB. Means-based standards value certain actions such as protect laws of impact makes laws following impossible. It is a side constraint on action and just the risk of future purchase children definitely think the global economy, Robertson 14. If the protests keep going, they would hit terrorism and retail, which make up 10% of GDP. This confidence would drive with its economy having strained. Hong Kong could be pushed into recession. Investors are fearing protests could escalate. The question is whether the territory's government is able to command populations and enable the security of economic policies. Investors must wait and watch and skip that card. And Chinese economic collapse causes CCP instability, violent lash out yet benign. The existence of migrant workers is regime makes vulnerable migrant workers who receive support. Our risk of economic action competition over land transfers tends to be resented because of the accommodation of million jobless people and the disproportionate security forces to employ excessive violence and purpose of competition results corruption, undermining the rule of law, and exacerbation of social conflicts. Economic stability is the social harmony as the party regards economic stabilization as the reliable option for preserving order. Cut the card in order and go down to the bottom. Prefer reasonable interpretations about the architecture, suggestions, feasibility of the right line, and round structural abuse for evaluating theory, the presence of linking picture harmonies. There's no abuse because structural abuse access is developed in the same way.
Couldn't you conceivably read a plan text that has nothing to do with living wage under your bright line of reasonability?
What do you mean?
You say you need link and impact turn ground. So, like, could I just read a plan text if I was affirming about, like, presumed consent, and that would meet the bright line of reasonability?
So there are other constraints on topicality.
Okay.
Like the resolution.
Okay, that's fine. So, could you tell me where that Ripstein card was? Because I cannot find it in this one.
Yeah, sure. It's under the CCP collapse evidence.
Okay. What does it say?
Right, so the Ripstein argument just says that a precondition for any rights claims is governmental stability, because government is necessary to enforce those right claims, and things like that.
You read Roberts and Chan, or you didn't read Roberts and Chan?
No.
So these two I'll take out.
Yeah.
And then you got the card there. That order.
And then I didn't read, keep going down. Yeah. And then I didn't read the A, B, C, D. I just read.
Did you read the E?
No.
Okay. So what's the impact of is the only solvency for protests?
Yeah. I mean that's the only advantage.
Okay, so you're saying that another round of protests is inevitable. Why is that?
Because the root cause of the protests is the inability to earn a living wage. The cost of living has increased greatly, and the average wage has not matched that increase in cost of living.
Do you have like where in the card does it say that this is going to happen again?
What do you mean?
Like where in the card does it say
right,
that?
So that's the Corcoran 14 evidence, which says that it's right underneath the first card in the advantage. So it says they could reoccur periodically or just keep growing while paralyzing governance.
Okay, so what is it referring to when they're saying they?
The protest, right? So the argument is because the root cause of the protest has not yet been accounted for, they will recur periodically.
Which piece of evidence is the living wage is the root cause of the protest?
Right, so the Corcoran 14 evidence identifies that the root cause of protests is bad economic conditions.
Wait, what's the plan text? Like, where's the advocacy?
So it's just that Hong Kong does a living wage.
Okay. So, like, you're expecting Hong Kong?
Yes.
Okay, cool. That's fine. So then let's talk about the Parkinson's evidence. So this says that CCP collapse causes multiple nuclear war. Does it say that like the collapse will lead to a transition period that leads to nuclear war, or that the CCP, like the party, is key?
No, so it's the party specifically is key. It identifies a variety of scenarios which could cause extinction. So the first is North Korea-South Korea nuclear conflict. So currently the CCP exports basic commodities to maintain North Korean stability. After the CCP, North Korea wouldn't have those commodities, and they would be more likely to attack South Korea. Are you taking prep?
Yeah, I already said. Your standards arguments would not suggest that like other bad consequential impacts are like irrelevant. Like it's not only that extinction is the only like important thing under your framework, right?
I mean, that's what the standard indicates.
Well, that's based on like one card, which is Boston, right?
I mean, so the framework justifies utilitarianism. The standard says that the most utilistic way to act is through minimizing existential risk.
Do you have a solvency advocate you could show me?
So what do you mean?
It's like a solvency advocate for your advocacy.
Yeah, so I'd say that the Parker and 14 evidence functions of solvency, right? He says that low wages are the root cause of the protests.
What part of the card does he say that in?
Right. So it says that Beijing authorities have been summoned by the protests unprepared. They do not want another chain. Right. So young Hong Kongers have worse job prospects. This generation is mad and not going to take it. Cool.
It's called 11 3/4. Three off case.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Three off case. Interpretation: the affirmative must defend a specific implementation of the resolution in an advocacy text in the form of a policy, minimally specifying the actor and the action taken. I'll repeat. The affirmative must defend a specific implementation of the resolution in an advocacy text in the form of a policy, minimally specifying the actor and the action taken in the 1AC. B is a violation. He doesn't do that. He clarified cross-examination. First stable advocate. Information uniquely important because there's a number of ways possible definitions of living wage. Navarre's with how much is enough rates to distribute and attempt to find implement living wage, what's normal needs, how are cultural customs to be dealt with, amount of salary should be allocated for saving, what's the definition of luxury items calculations of the family income to pride single earner. There's no normal means or general aims to the principle of the resolution because there's so many factors in the resolution which seem the infinite number of potential advocacies that are independent voter because textually my interpretation is true key difference because architecture is the only predictable source of a negative ground. CX doesn't check A, there's too many questions you could add negative, miss, and cross-examination. B, the text is always going to be infinitely more stable than cross-examination. Also, the judge doesn't flow cross-examinations. Also, key to education of a specific text of imitation key for the negative to generate effective clash. Next is utopian fiat. If he doesn't specify a solvency mechanism, there's no way he could read and explain what is living wage mechanisms in cross-examination because either that would mean that you're allowed to add new places advocacies and AC in cross-examination, or he doesn't have a solvency mechanism, which means I can't challenge solvency in the first place. For example, what the effects of the living wage would have on the economy, which means that he basically gets a fiat solvency which controls the representation. Because first, I can't engage in effective clash. I can't engage in effective clash with the affirmative. We don't have any. We don't have the education and the fairness. Then fairness because I can't get a solvency. D is voter. Fairness is voter because debates competitive activity like all such activities outside fair rules. Always other harms to debate because A, we debate for trophies. B, judges are arbitrators, not educators. That's the job of the coach. And C, judges don't care about what happens any around. Other round impacts are relevant. E is framework. One, your theories nation competing interpretation reasonable and powers judge bias control term criticism normal. Fairness violation compliant around judge bias external and fightable. 2, evaluation before all their arguments can't play the game without knowing the rules. First, 3, reject the debater. The A, the rounds already been skipped before. So by the abuse of the T is the only non-arbitrary for the judge vote crossed by judge biases. B, rejecting the argument. T, severance for the advocacy, which makes the moving target friends argument take their responsibility, and the winner from the NC turns to original NC as you see rejecting the arguments, T rejecting debater because they lose their advocacy. Also, RVs are bad on top quality. ARVs kill topics education debaters in class with your team arguments and substantive in case where active substantive debate in case where I actually win the theory debate. This house because it was 100% of substantive education after the one you see RVRGs are not sensible because one not asked whether for being for the second team for the counters are offensive, they're defensive. This an independent voter because he's fairness because he had that around without logic cuts. Also, all abuse is self-imposed by the affirmative. If I win this theory interpretation, because it means that the negative had to alter their strategy to be abusive to counteract the abuse of the one they see next off. Interpretation, all claims that the plan must be have a solvency act that argues that the specific plan text of the A should be enforced in the one ACB's violation. None of his cards talk about the Hong Kong specifically minimum living wage. At best, it's just talking about how they want better economic conditions. That's not a solvency advocate. Skip the 2 cards in the violation. The standardist topic literature only solvency act ensures the act plan is back to top literature. Otherwise, the act is like a random advocate. Nobody talk about top literature. Steve Fraser advocates because A. Otherwise, next that structure is finished with neg. The act to make solvency arguments against the one NC. Whereas the no the arguments against the AC. Solvency in top literature. Equitable division grounds. Steve Fraser is one debater. Can weigh a wide variety of arguments that inherently be easier access to the ballot. B. Top literature ensures the effect of act is pretty cool, which is important because otherwise I can't be expected to construct arguments to develop strategy. Furthermore, even if the plan text is disclosed, I cannot convince you because it's not in the top literature. I just know to prep theory. He will always be more prepared on the plan than I will see. Research arguments C is quality brown if they're actually C. If they're attributes outside the top, there's no checking their attributes, which means they can go on the worst possible brown quality brown, key difference because the affix higher quality arguments, and they will access whole quality affix inherent structural advantage in the round use voter crossed by the fairness and education fairness voter from last interpretation and voter topical education focusing on current topics key. Actually learning about new things rather than rehashing the same. Can debate every round in education about an issue currently debating the political world. East theory framework crossed by the framework and rejected debater on this show independently because it's a question of his advocacy, what his advocacy lacks. There's no way you can drop the argument on this. Skip the 6 reasons for no arguments. Next up is counterplan. Counterplan the resolve the Chinese federal government implementing free market democracy with free elections in Hong Kong. Albert 14 explains Beijing's reluctance to allow Hong Kong to develop a full-fledged democracy with free and fair election perennial vote contention. The problem is ambiguity based on the documents that the Hong Kong chief executive shall be selected by election and ultimate aim is the selection of Chinese chief executive which government procedures. China's decision in 2004 2014 by popular vote Congress leader and indication that Beijing will also the drag at its reforms indefinitely. This doesn't change the country. This doesn't collapse the Chinese party. All it does is it makes Hong Kong a free market democracy. The Chinese Communist Party still has basically all the control in Asia. This all protests and credit rating. They continue. The demands for a very widely shared aims have been the ability to hold executive office pre-approval of candidates by Beijing pro-Beijing committee. Survey polls of the general public index satisfaction fluctuated over time, but trend emerged that Hong Kong is increasing despite the all-chief effects of unpopular Hong Kong's luxury body disproportionately priced business interests and criminal Beijing is controls the internal to protest. You might be right. They want a living wage. You missed the larger point about protests. This means that the entirety of the protest internal link is solved because you give them literally what they want, a democracy. Skip the Pesach card. Case solvency. First on offense, or first on Bostrom actually. First, Bostrom is inherently anti-utilitarian because if we focus on only on existential truths, we'll always be caring about random 1% or 0.001% chances of risk, which means we wouldn't make a consequential decision calculus. Second, we should weigh between these arguments. Probability should probably be relevant. Otherwise, I could just assert an extinction scenario without carded evidence. Three, this makes the probability and post-fit distinction just because we won't be able to find value in the post-card doesn't mean that we can't in this round. Then go to the offense. Their protests are definitely over. Atlanta 14 plays Hong Kong pro-democracy protests appear to be over. Officers bans fear not the reigns of intensive shelters. The protest conclusion is very clear to the directory for the Chinese government and turns first. His advocacy to unemployment, Lungi and Wang, 14 explains new regulation 2004 likely represents change minimum wage enforcement. One pattern system across the city from determines specifications that the last minimum wage has been more negative following the 2004 regulation after control for more local fund that estimates the minimum wage have to be more negative with consistent with prediction, which means that you leads to net decrease in the economy, blink turning your economic advantage and studies show adverse negative impacts on Hong Kong. Lungi and Wang explains others suggest that the talk of adverse impacts on labor market, particularly on employment opportunities for a group of vulnerable workers, as well as the overall economic potential increase in labor and business costs was anticipated, especially for the section employing a large number of effective low universities, additional burden would impact both Hong Kong's economic and its market competitiveness, and go to the reasonability bright on the underview. This is a terrible bright on because it means you could literally read any plan text which have linked impact turnaround, which means that you don't. You should prefer competing interpretations because it allows us for the best norms, as I've argued on the top county debate. But also, this reason boundary is just terrible. Also, this is an arbitrary bright line. He has no reason to why reasonability is a good thing. No new argument from the lawyer because this debate started in the 1AC, which means that he can't cross the line reasonability to the theory shows.
Cool. So let's talk about the interpretations you read. So the first interpretation says that I must defend a specific advocacy text, correct?
And you want to see that?
Yeah. Well, it doesn't say that.
Well, I said okay. I clarified.
Okay.
I said that in my
Okay.
speech. Cool.
So the second interpretation says that all planks of a plan must have a solvency advocate, correct? Wait, but the first interpretation said that it didn't
Well, I'm
have a
assuming
plan.
your plan is in cross-examination, right? Otherwise, if you don't have a plan, then I guess
But Drew, your two interpretations contradict each other.
no, they don't, because one's about text, one's about plans, right?
What do you mean one
The,
is about
the second
text?
interpretation says nothing about plan text. It just says plans.
All planks of a plan,
Yes.
right? But
So
the first interpretation assumes that I did not read a plan with planks.
I mean, no, it assumes you read a plan in cross-examination.
What does that mean?
Like literally what you
Okay,
did.
That's fine. Let's talk about the solvency terms you read.
Yeah.
So where does this first piece of evidence say anything about unemployment?
So the argument is the Lungi was a study.
Don't tell me about the study. Read me a line from the evidence that substantiates the fact.
Sure.
Right? The last piece of your evidence says, after we control for more local trends, we find that the estimates of minimum wage coefficients become more negative.
Right.
Why? What does that? How does that mean unemployment?
Right. So the net effect on the economy is negative.
Wait, what does that mean? It says that the.
I mean, if you'd like me to go into the methodology and explain to you, like.
No, I'm not interested in the methodology. I just want to know why minimum wage coefficients becoming negative means unemployment, right?
Right. That probably has to be like I have to explain the methodology to explain like the terms behind it, right?
No, just read me a line from this evidence that substantiates how you've tagged it.
It says the coefficients become more negative.
What does it mean? What is a coefficient?
Right. The effect on the economy is negative. The coefficient is just the variable about like the variable of the economy. Like I don't know how to explain this well because I'm not an economist, but like.
Okay. Did you read the UN 14 or the UN 2 evidence?
No, I read just the first two Lungi evidence.
Okay. So
I didn't read two.
you didn't read any of this.
Yeah.
How is the counterplan competitive?
It's advantage.
Okay, sure. Let's talk about your utopian fiat standard.
Yeah.
So, what is the argument here?
You don't specify a solvency mechanism, so I can't challenge solvency.
How do I not specify a solvency mechanism?
Like, you tell me you
14 evidence is very clear that low wages are the root cause.
Okay, well, you don't explicitly specify it, so I think my interpretation is still
Wait, so how is being vague more utopian, right? It seems like that would lower the threshold for the link you have to win to any.
No, because you could be in the one area, like, that's not what my solvency mechanism is. Also, it's just a question of, like, you're having a less nuanced debate, right?
What do you mean a less nuanced debate? How does that, why does that mean utopian fiat?
No, it's a question, like, if you don't
Seems like less
well, no,
nuanced.
you're hinting at an argument about how vagueness is good. I'm just saying vagueness is bad.
Okay. You read, so you say no RBIs, correct?
Yeah.
Alright. Okay, I'll take pro. Okay.
How much time do you have?
340 used. So the order will be a new off, his shells, in the order he read them, and then extensions of the AC, and then onto the power plant.
Sorry, can you repeat that one more time? I was close.
Yeah, sure. So it will be new off, and then Drew shells in order to do it.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Everyone ready?
Interpretation, if the interpretation, the neg must grant an RBI if the neg reads 2 or more theory shells by violation. He reads 2 theory shells. He says they are no RBIs above 1 strategy. They force me to overcome both shells. They go for whichever shell I cover the least destroys my strategy, since there's literally no strategic object against it. 2 is norming. It forces them only to read the shell that is most convincing, or one where both shells are especially important. This often makes when multiple shells are just that choice jobs ensures only good norms are established, and that they're established strongly norming ensures practices that are good for education and fairness are established and norming out as any other education fairness argument. A sub point is it ensures more good theory norms rather than just a single norm, and B is actually key to establishing the norms they argue for without granting RBIs. Their shells are ineffective and have no real impact. Third, argument is reciprocity. An RBI, a theory shell without an a theory shell without an RBI is virtually nib because I have to beat back that shell before I can access any of my offense. Means he has a structural skew because he has a 2-to-1 advantage because he can either access the ball by winning substance or access the ball by winning theory. Also means it's consistent with my reasonability bright line because it is dealing with structural abuse as opposed to substantive abuse. Structural abuse deals with the amount of racks he has to foul, not just the quality of the ground or the quality of the arguments he has under that shell. You vote on fairness and education. You can cross apply his voters. Now onto the first interpretation you read. So first, I think Parkman 14's solvency idea. He says that the root cause of protest in Hong Kong is the inability to learn a living wage. The increases in standard of living have not been compensated by growth in wage. And second, I need the original interpretation he has doesn't specify a time period. Doesn't say when I have to specify hold to the text of the interpretation because the languages are arbitrary. It's open to interpretation. The text is the only stable way. So he has also relatively being shifty in later speeches. So I need the Hong Kong Special Administrator reaching the People's Republic of China ought to require employees to pay a living wage index to aggregate wage inflation calculated in 14. To make it to be now working 36 dollars per hour to be able to be substituting the current wage of serious insufficient food and housing, renovating major regardless of inflation, not labor costs. Given the projection of GDP increase, we expect estimates to absorb the additional wage bills through sales. The minimum wage should be raised to $36 an hour, and also ultimately stable advocacy standard. So one, I'm more stable. You force over specification, which kills ground. I can just have an extremely nuanced plan which shifts out of all of your disadvantages. Broadness is general because it lowers the threshold of the length you need to win, which means you have access to more grounds, especially true on this topic because the resolution does not limit to any specific government. So I can literally expect any country, which means vagueness is good, especially on this resolution. You can classify this argument as utopian fiat. The same thing is true. I do not fiat out of solvency. It just lowers the threshold of length you need to win. Also, optimism. The other interpretation, this contradicts another interpretation. The first interpretation says I don't have a plan text, and the second says that I need to that every part of the plan must have a plan that is substantiated through solvency. So he should only be able to go for one of the two interpretations because they contradict. Winning one negates the truth of the other. Also, my interpretation comes first because it governs access to his shells. It questions whether he should have had access to these arguments to begin with. Now, onto the case. Extend the purpose of going now that Hong Kong. Extend the purpose of going now that the implementation of the language is key to finding the purpose that protects CCP's disability. CCP causes multiple scenarios for extinction. This outweighs unemployment. AC points back to unemployment only has a small economic effect, but nuclear war would cause extinction also is economically devastating. Visa points repair reversibility. We can always repeal the living wage if it has harmful economic consequences, but extinction is permanent, which means that if there's any risk, it's bad. That is sufficient to affirm. Also, you should always prefer myself. Always prefer the path of the 1400s to the solvency. He's reading on recency. His evidence is literally 12 years old. Does not account for Hong Kong's current economic conditions. Now on to the counterpoint. Current do both net benefits increase increases solvency because if you're right about the root cause, then we solve that. If I'm right about the root cause, we also solve that. Net benefit is CCP instability. Also, he says that also off the protest advantage. He says that protests are over, but that is not responsive. My argument is that even if protests are temporarily over, they will get increasingly worse because the root cause has not been satisfied. They will recur periodically. That is the Parker 14 evidence, which he does not contest.
I think I had like 58 seconds. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's like evidence that you read on the theory debate was read on solvency advocates, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Did you read the strat? You read so the standards on your intern were strats, you norming, and
Reciprocity.
Could you explain the norming standard?
Yeah, so the norming argument is that if you only read more shell, then you spend more time developing it, it becomes more persuasive, which means that we develop better community norms, which is outweighed by reading 3 or 4 bad, very bloody shells.
Cool. It's going to be on the first interpretation at the bottom, like wherever you have the voters float. Then I'll go down that then go to his interpretation. No time permits the next one.
Wait. So your first shell.
First shell.
Voter.
Yeah.
Can you tell me like which argument it's gonna be?
Yeah, it's the argument about neg abuse is imposed by the affirmative.
Okay.
Cool. Is everyone good? David, you have conceded that aff abuse is not as bad as neg abuse because you imposed it on me. The argument was very simple. I am being abusive in the NC because you were abusive in the AC. If I win my interpretation, that means I win this round because it means that the other interpretation he read was because of something he did, which means you don't blame me for that, and then neg theory comes first. Go to the top of the interp. Extend the interpretation you must have been advocacy in the 1AC, in the 1AC for your advocacy, that cross-examination check, the extend the stable advocacy here that says that there's an infinite number, this is an overarching argument, it's very good, it says there's an infinite number of things that you can specify, which means that you need to tell me what you're reading. In the first place, his only response is that vagueness is good, but no vagueness is not good because you're just dealing my arguments in the 2 and R, which means I have literally his only response is that his only response is that like some sort of predictability claim, but that's irrelevant because predictably check back or to predictably check back by generic arguments. For example, a capitalism critique, which means that is irrelevant. It's just a question of me being able to link my arguments in the first place. Also, even if you don't buy that argument, the utopian fiat argument is very good on this issue. He's conceded the warrant for depth of education from I even read solvency specs, and I can do specific comparison, which means that even which is a functions that impact turn to his vagueness argument, because it means that we don't have a legitimate form of education in the round because we just use a broad stroke to talk about different issues, which means that you, if the fairness debate is sort of muddled in this, you should pull the trigger on the education bit because that is the tiebreaker. His vagueness cross application doesn't respond to the education part of utopian fiat, which means he's definitely losing certification. But the biggest problem is he doesn't even read a counter interpretation. When I read competing interpretations, you don't know what his norm is in the first place, which means you don't know what counter norm you're voting for, which means he doesn't get access to this. He doesn't get access to any of his arguments, but extend the competing interpretations. Competing interpretations because reasonability rights judge intervention extend. Drop the debater. You drop the debater because it'll be severance. Also because it's like shifting is bad for me. Then go to the RBI's arguments. Extend the RBI's arguments. Each of these are disadvantages to his interpretation. Counter-interpretation, if the negative reads multiple interpretations, only two interpretations, they don't have to grant an RBI. The first benefit is topical education, because it crowds out topical education, because then the one area would spend all the time on theory and one C would as well, which means that there's literally, if it's true that topical education is somewhat important, which is he conceded on the other interpretation, that this means this outweighs his interpretation. He's also conceded that this is nonsensical because the basic point, which is nonsense to give him RBI concerns defense and offense, and logic outweighs because it's the basic threshold for argumentation, which means he loses the RBIs. But even if you don't buy that, go to the argument I made about fairness being a voter. or I don't know where you have this loaded. It's somewhere in the voter section. Extend the argument says that extend the argument says that you don't care about outright impacts. That you're just simply an adjudicator, and that's your role of the battle. Which means that this functions as a severe as linked defense on the argument about norming, because you don't care about norming. Your role is just to vote for the better debater. Then let's go to his interpretation. I'll grant him the RBI now if he wins the RBI debate. His interpretation doesn't say when I have to grant it to him. So if we're caring about text of the interpretation, I'll grant it to him in the 2AR if he wins it. Let's go. Counter-interpretation. I already with counter-interpretation. Let's go down his arguments. His ground skew argument is irrelevant because even if it's true that I read multiple interpretations, you could just do it too in the 1AR. Just learn how to layer. Also, you could read a critical a K in the 1AR. There's so many different things you can do. Just because a neg had a good strategy doesn't mean that you shouldn't have a good strategy. Next, but turn affirming is easier. First is one. You get first speech last speech was an argument which is conceded from the last speech, which means you should probably give me some credence on this issue. But even if you don't buy it, more arguments why is about the better side of the issue is they get the better side of the topic literature. So if they do get to specify, or if they do get to specify, they get to specify, which means that I'm already a ground skew, which means I need to be able to make it structurally abusive for you, because you're on the right side of the issue on basically everything. On the normings arguments, RBIs don't norm for shit. If you look at the last 5 years of debate, nothing has happened, and we tried to debate for RBIs. Also, even if he ensures more good theory, there's no reason as to why that's a good thing. There was no education voter in the one area. There's a topical education voter, but there's no reason why we need good theory. Also, he says norming is key to developing norms to specify. Well, let's focus on one specific theory interpretation, but I can just do that by collapsing into 2 and R, which means this is not unique. Office reciprocity argument, again, just cross apply, you can do it too, even if it's a shitty argument, it's an argument. Also, you prefer the 1NC theory, the 1NC theory because the RBI's argument specifically because they were 100% conceded, which means my standards outweigh on strength. If I'm giving you a bunch of mechanisms as to why my theory interpretations come first, the only thing he has going for him is meta theory comes first, but meta theory doesn't come first, even if his arguments about it controls the intelligence and answer my arguments. But no, that's not true. It's not a way. It's not a question of how first they impact back to fairness in education. So you have to weigh the links to fairness in education. There's no such thing as meta fairness or meta education. But even if you don't buy that, topicality should come, or questions of advocacy should come before theory interpretations, because it's a question of me literally not being able to engage. That's the definition of structural abuse and stable advocacy. Even if it's true that it's harder for him to engage, the topicality shall maybe in the abstract meta theory outweighs, but in this specific interest, the topicality shall outweighs because it's a question of me not being able to engage. So here's how the Brown breaks down. I'm winning the theory interpretation on the NC. Also, quickly on the other in-house interpretation, I'm not reading 2 theory interpretations. He didn't say when I have to specify it. Kick out the second interpretation, which means that I don't violate because I only have 1 theory interpretation. Interpretations are conditional. So here's how the round breaks down. There's a couple mechanisms to evaluate this round. First is the question, the conceded argument about how he imposes views on himself. So his theory is irrelevant because it's a question if I win my interpretation. He also doesn't have counter interpretation, so strength of link. Also, he's conceded RBA arguments 100%, and I put some defense arguments, so that's strength of link. He's also conceded.
All right,
Let's here.
So the order will be my show, just top down, and then his counter interpretation. All right, is everyone ready?
Extend the interpretation, the neg must grant the half an RBI if the neg is 2 or more theory shells off of his IB 1. Your IB can't be conditional. That's like saying, I won't read a nib if you prove that a nib is unfair. I'll kick the nib. And the way the interpretation is written is that you must grant me the RBI. You cannot put a condition on granting me the RBI such as that I must prove the validity of your RBI in the first place. And second, it is impossible for you to get the text of my interpretation because you do not have a 3 and R, which means that it's literally impossible for you to take the action of granting me the RBI. So insofar as you see that the text of the interpretation was the spirit of the interpretation, these semantic IBs don't hold any water. That is in the violation. He reads. He reads two shells that are both, and he says they both reasons to drop the RBI. The fact that he kicked out one shell is not responsive. You can cross-apply the response I make to his I mean they can be conditional. Also doesn't have a 3 and R. Then onto the standards. Extending for standard strategy. You force me to overcover both shells to take over whichever shell I cover. The least destroys my strategy since there's literally no strategic option against 3. Then you can extend the second argument, which is normally forcing him to only read for forcing him not to get RBS and both shell means that he only goes for one shell. Develops that more and develop a more persuasive norm. You can say that extend the weighing comparison between norming. Extend the ace point that shows more inferior norms, which are set rather than just a single norm. Then you can extend the V point that is actually key to establishing the norms. They argue for this means I control the internal into all of the abuse. If he's winning any of his other shells, that now becomes a reason to vote for me. The only your norm of specing a plan X and 1 will not be adopted absent my interpretation. That control these strong internally to all of the theoretical offense you are sending. His only response to this is that RBIs don't norm. That is not responsive. My argument is that not that an RBI is key to norm, and that having multiple RBIs discourages us from developing one theoretical position, which is key to developing persuasive theoretical arguments. This second argument he makes is 2NR collapse, but that is not responsive. I concede competing interpretations, which means that even if a 2NR collapse would solve, my interpretation always solves marginally better, which is still theoretical offense and reason to vote for me. Then you can extend the reciprocity argument. Extend the reciprocity argument theory, but that an RBI is functionally a nib because I have to beat back here before I have offense to any, before I have access to any substantive offense. He says that you can do it too, but this only supercharges the link into the strategy skew argument because he would force me to read multiple shells in the time crunch 1 AR, which is still a waste of my time. Still means I have to overinvest in theory and means I don't have access to any substantive offense. Also hijacks the internal into his topic education voter. If you think that topic education is the most important voter, that is a reason that is a reason to affirm because his interpretation would force more theory, which crowds out topic education only. Mine limits the amount of theory in the round, which means we get more access to education. Then you can extend that my shell governs access to his shells because it indicts his ability to run those shells in the first place, which means you always evaluate my shell first. He says that there's no such thing as meta theory, but he says that winning the abuse in his shell proves that his is true. But 1, my shell is still a prior question because it governs access to his shells, and 2, I couldn't properly contest the validity of your shell, which means that we don't know if your interpretation is true, which means that we don't know if the app is culpable for any negative abuse. Also, he says that T outweighs because it's a question of him not being able to engage the position. But 1, this is answered by the above argument, and 2nd, the theory outweighs because it's a question of norms. Your topicality interpretation will only be relevant for the duration of this tournament. Also, off of his counter interpretation, not responsive, I explain why my shell is a prior question.